Hey guys, MetalJesus here. Now every couple of years I like to share with you some of my favorite tips and tricks for collecting video games. And enough time has gone by since my last video and enough has changed with collecting games over the last few years that I think it's time for me to update that and give you some new tips. Now I'm going to do something a little bit different here because while I came up with my own list, I reached out to one of my favorite Facebook groups to get some of their feedback as well. That group is, I want to give them a shout out, it is the Greater Seattle Area Retro Gamers Group that is on Facebook. If you live in the Seattle area and you're not part of that group, you probably should be, because there are some really cool game collectors in there and they've got a lot of good tips. I'm probably going to go into that a little bit more here in a second, but yeah, it's time for me to give you and their top tips for collecting games. Let's take a look. Now, the first thing I want to mention to you guys, maybe this is not necessarily a tip per se, but it's something that I wanted to talk about because it's something that we are definitely seeing a little bit more of in the Seattle area when it comes to retro gaming stores. And that is when you find a game in a store with a price tag on it and you take it up to the cash register, the person who is going to ring you up suddenly says, oh yeah, that's going to be $10 more, $20 more. There is no indication as to why they would do that when you're holding the game in your hand with the price tag on it. But it has happened to me and it's happened to several people in our area, and I wanted to bring this up because frankly, I think it's a pretty bad policy. Now, I want to be clear, it's not every retro gaming store. If you're curious, if you're sitting there wondering, is this Kelsey's Pink Gorilla? Absolutely not. Actually, I reached out to her and was kind of asking her why a business would do this. And she doesn't know. I mean, she did say that sometimes, occasionally, there can be a error or a mistake, you know, when someone is pricing a game, that will happen. But her policy is, and her store is, that you would honor that and eat that, because why would you risk losing potential customers? And I guess that's the thing I don't understand here. I get that mistakes can happen, but what we're seeing in the Seattle area with some stores is that depending on the game, when you take it up there, they may decide to ask you for more money. And like I said, this is ridiculous to me. This is ridiculous. First of all, it may actually be legal depending on where you live. Not an expert in that, but it sure feels pretty scummy. At the very least, it might require a complaint to the Better Business Bureau. But I just don't understand why a store would do this. I know when they want to maximize profits, but why do it at the expense of pissing off your customer base? Because people will share it online. People will talk about it. So again, I hope this is a very isolated incident. Maybe it's not happening in your town or your city, but I wanted to bring it up because it's a very disturbing trend. And game collectors like me, we're not happy about it. It's ridiculous. Now that said, I do still really like shopping local and shopping at retro gaming stores. And again, not all of them are bad in my area. You just have to kind of, watch out for the ones that are maybe trying to do something a little shady. But here's the thing. I really believe that it is to your benefit as a collector to get to know the store owners, get to know the employees in there, and let them know what you're collecting for. I've said this before, but in the Seattle area, I am one of the collectors here that most stores know that I am really big into collecting big box PC games. And it's my belief that most retro gaming stores, when they take in trades, when they get these big collections, they want to turn around and be able to know who that can be sold to. Now, it's really easy for them if it's a console or a system that's really popular, right? If they get N64 games or NES games or GameCube games, they don't have to worry about that. But if someone brings in like, a N-Gage collection or a big box PC game collection or a Virtual Boy collection, and you are interested in that stuff, it makes sense for you to let them know that that's what you're collecting for. You know, my goal is that if they get something like that in there, instead of going, gosh, who is gonna buy this? Instead, they've got a little scrap of paper with my name on it, and my email address and my phone number, and they know who to call to potentially pick up that game. And so I just want to mention, I think that's a pretty big tip if you have retro gaming stores in your area. Also, that could apply to mom and pop thrift stores and pawn shops. I've done that as well. You know, if you get to know somebody who's working at a Goodwill, that might be a bad example, but sometimes that can happen where, you know, Goodwill typically sends their stuff to an online store, but you know, like there's little mom and pop thrift stores that, you know, might be able to help you out if they get something really cool in. Now let's get back to Facebook. Now I know not everyone is a fan of Facebook, but I do feel like in the last couple of years that Facebook groups and marketplaces have really taken off for places where people who are into a certain hobby, collecting, whether it's video games or vinyl or sneakers or action figures, it seems like Facebook is the place where a lot of people go to connect with other collectors and do a lot of business, a lot of trading, a lot of, you know, buying and selling of stuff there. And so I get it, not everyone's into Facebook. You may not have a Facebook account, but it might be worth, you know, creating one, because then you can go on there and probably meet people who you might not, you know, otherwise do that. The other thing I want to mention too is that some of the bigger groups on Facebook may break out their sections into different interests. So for instance, my group there, we have over 8,000 followers, and we do break out pickups as well as the marketplace and trading and stuff like that. The reason why we do that is because not everybody's interested in seeing that content, so we let people choose. But it's really important to know that, for instance, if you were to go and join my group or some of these other ones, you may not necessarily automatically be part of, say, the pickups group. So just be aware that you'll also need to do that. The other thing I want to mention about Facebook groups is that it's a really great place for people to find out information about particular games or systems or kind of what's hot or what's not, or even sometimes prices. The number one question that people email me about is usually, hey, what do I think this thing is worth? And to be quite honest with you, unless I'm looking for that thing, I don't know. And so I always send people to a Facebook group page, because that way they can connect with people who are looking into that or will know if that's a good deal or not. Also too, I want to mention pickups. I see this a lot, especially on Facebook. People will get, you know, big lots of games, right? They'll go to a garage sale and they'll get a bunch of stuff, some of it that they're interested in and some of it that are not. And I'll see trades happening where, you know, someone will post a photo of stuff that they got, and in the comments will people be like, hey, I'm looking for that particular game there, or are you gonna hold on to that one because I've got this thing over here? And so again, it's a really great place to connect with people and potentially, you know, build your collection. And on that note, I do want to emphasize that it seems to me that trading in the last couple of years has become extremely important, especially since the price of games, you know, when you pay retail price of these games, has skyrocketed. And so I've seen a lot of people, my friends included, that they are doing more trading than they ever did before. And I think it's great. And there's a ton of options for you. So obviously I mentioned Facebook, but you know, there is also OfferUp. There is also some forums that are really active, like Atari Age. There's a bunch of different forums out there where people do a lot of private trading. And again, it seems like this is a trend that is increasing, which I think is great. You know, if you have a bunch of games sitting in a collection that a couple years ago you were kind of excited about, but maybe now you're not playing, well, maybe somebody, you know, is really interested in that, so you can make a really awesome trade and get stuff that you will appreciate, that you will enjoy. So I think that's a great idea. Let's talk about garage sales. So you guys know I love going to garage sales, but it is a bit of a grind. I mean, it's one of those things where it's all about a numbers game. It's all about getting out there and hitting as many garage sales as possible, because often they don't have video games, or there are out there people competing with you. The one thing I do really like about garage sales is that you can typically negotiate the price. This is something that is very difficult to do in a retro gaming store or at a pawn shop or thrift store, because they typically, they want maximum value. They paid a lot to get it, and they want to maximize their profits, which is totally valid. They've got bills, they've got employees and things like that. But you can still get deals at garage sales. And I like that idea. I still do it. It all depends on your area and how lucky you are. I guess what I would say is that, in my experience, again, don't go out just once and expect to find gold. That doesn't happen to me. It doesn't happen to most people I know. Most people who are really into garage sales, they go every single weekend, and they are bright and early in the morning. That's what they do. So, I do think garage sales are still alive, still kicking, and also too, maybe you can find some trade fodder. If you learn a little bit about electronics, things that are collectible, like Sony Walkmans or action figures or other things like that, maybe you can find non-video game related stuff, take them back to some of those forums and Facebook and stuff like that, and maybe do trades for video games. Not a bad deal. And what do I think about eBay? Is eBay dead? Well, I absolutely don't think that eBay is dead at all. I just think that because of the popularity of collecting video games, it's more competitive than ever before. But there are still some deals to be had on there if you're patient, because some stuff comes up on eBay that just is never going to come up locally or at another venue. For instance, recently, a save search that I had on eBay for probably 5 years finally got a hit. And, it was for an old Commodore 64 game. I was looking for the boxed floppy version of it because that's what I had as a kid. That's what I wanted to get back in the collection. But it took 5 years. And yeah, it wasn't a $5 game, but it also wasn't crazy expensive either. And so I was thrilled to see that come up. So there are definitely still some things on eBay. Now, the biggest gotcha with eBay, in my opinion, is fakes. If you are gonna be going for, Pokemon on the Game Boy or the Game Boy Advance, if you're gonna go for any of those cartridge-based games, it's the fakes that you really have to worry about. My advice to you, if you're concerned with that in any way, if you're getting some sort of weird vibe from it, or maybe you're not unsure with the photos, message the seller. Ask them to open it up. If they don't, and it's kind of a top dollar game, I would say don't buy it, Or if you do, then be okay with potentially getting a fake, because it's been my experience and what I hear from other people, there are a ton of fakes out there. You have to be very careful about that. The other thing I want to mention is perhaps you should consider importing games. This is something that I've definitely started leaning on over the last probably say 5 years or so, especially when it comes to some of the consoles. You guys have seen this in some of my collection videos that often, not always, but often you can get the same game, but in a different region for less money. This happens all the time with, some of those Famicom games, Super Famicom games, some of the Dreamcast games, it just goes on and on and on. And the only thing you have to obviously worry about is the language barrier, especially when you're going to be getting, say, Japanese games. Typically, arcade games, action games, if it doesn't have English, you can often kind of figure it out. Also, too, a lot of these clone systems have the ability to download and insert the English patch to it. So, for instance, a lot of fans will create an English patch for, say, a Japanese RPG that came out on the Famicom or Super Famicom. They've done the translations. All you need to do is download the patch, put it onto your device that you have, let's say a Retron or maybe like an analog device, and it's practically the same thing, which is pretty cool. And often it is way cheaper to do so. So again, I think people forget that. I also want to mention Video Game Expos. Now, it's no secret, I love going to Video Game Expos for a number of reasons. It's awesome being around like-minded individuals who are into the same thing as you, who are as passionate about it as you. But, you know, in the last year and a half, it's been a very rough ride. There haven't been very many expos. However, we're starting to see that change. And I am so excited for this. There is huge pent-up demand for game collectors and just fans of video games to go back to expos. And we see that starting, you know, now, and it's going to continue on for the next year. I have very high hopes for that. I think you're going to see some amazing gaming expos come back. And frankly, I can't wait. Another thing I want to mention, and I say it a lot on my channel because it is one of my core beliefs when it comes to collecting really anything, and that is when everybody is going left, you go right. And what I mean by that is that if everybody is trying to collect this thing over here, well, you know, supply and demand, right? If there is very little supply and a ton of demand, well, of course that is going to be more expensive for you to collect. And also it may just be more difficult for you to collect. So instead, what I try to do 99% of the time is go the other direction. You know, my days of collecting NES games, probably N64 games, you know, a bunch of these Nintendo systems, they are over. I might get lucky occasionally, but I don't even look there anymore. And the reason for that is, again, is because there's just too many people over there trying to get those same games. And thankfully, for the most part, I have what I want. So instead, what I do when I go into a retro gaming store or an expo or anything like that, I go and I look for big box PC games because most people aren't. I look for PSP games. I look for weird stuff, you know. I look for, you know, Dreamcast imports, you know. I look for Super Famicom games that I don't recognize, that has a cool, you know, label on it that, yeah, I'll take a chance on this game for $5, you know what I mean? That's what I do. That's what's so much more fun than trying to compete and getting frustrated by spending too much money on some of these systems that everybody is just clamoring to get, you know? I've said this before, but now is the time, if you are interested, to collect PS3, PS4 games, Xbox 360 games, Xbox One games. I guarantee you that probably in, you know, 10, 15, 20 years, we're going to be looking back going, man, we should have picked those up when we could have, you know, when we had the chance to get those cheap. Because I'll tell you what, when I go into a pawn shop, they've got 360 games as far as the eye can see. And that's a great system, especially if you get the later models, and there's a ton of awesome games on it. So that's my recommendation for you. I also want to say, don't get discouraged. I mean, buy games that you actually want to play, that you actually want to enjoy in your collection. It's my belief, and I could be wrong, but I just don't think that video game collecting is going to be a better long-term investment than, say, you know, your 401k, the stock market, real estate, things like that. And people have lately been asking me if they think video games would be a good long-term investment. No, I don't. I really don't. I mean, as of the making of this video, we do seem that we're kind of maybe in a bubble, and maybe parts of it will go down, maybe parts will go up. The sealed market is crazy. The graded market is crazy. I don't care about any of that. That's very specific. If you want to dip your toe into that, personally, I think you're crazy, but more power to you. But, you know, when I look at my collection, it's a decent collection for sure, and I love it. However, I do think that probably in 20, 30 years, when I would potentially retire, well, I don't know if anybody's going to care about 99% of this stuff. You know, when I look at Atari and television and some of that stuff, you know, those games really aren't worth that much. There's a handful. But again, as a long-term investment, that would be pretty risky. Again, don't do it for that reason. Do it because you love it. Do it because it's an art form and you want to preserve it, because you want to be able to look at it, you know, maybe pass it down to your kids. That's why you should do it. You know, it's very similar to, I think, to vinyl record collecting. If you look at vinyl records, they've kind of gotten expensive, but overall, if you look at the history of vinyl records, there's only a few that are actually really valuable. You know, we're talking about those original Beatles albums and things like that, but the vast majority of albums from the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and 80s can still be had for $10 or $20 or less. And so, you know, think of video games in that light. That's how I feel, at least today. So there you go, guys. That is my tips and tricks for collecting in this wild and crazy market that we find ourselves in today. It's gonna be very interesting to see what happens in the next couple years, especially as we all know that digital is really coming on strong. Also, we have things like Game Pass and stuff like that. You know, again, I'm a huge fan of digital. I do like Game Pass, but my heart will always be with collecting physical games. And I'm sure if you're watching this video, you probably feel the same way. So, love to know what you think down in the comments below. And as always, I want to thank you for watching my channel. Thank you for subscribing, and take care.